Magic is one of the most interesting combat styles in RuneScape. It had its time at the top and now it's in the gutter as the worst combat style in the game. It's going to be interesting going through all of the things that made Magic great and why it's been left behind. Strap in. Before we get into the items, I want to talk about the unique position that Magic is in and why it has a natural advantage over either the range or melee combat styles. The combat triangle. Magic armor is strong against melee attacks, and to demonstrate that, I put on my max mage gear that I own, and I had 3931 armor against melee attacks, 3612 armor against magic attacks, and 3249 armor against range attacks. This is a pretty massive buff with the combat triangle, so any boss that attacks with melee, you're going to naturally want to have magic armor equipped to take less damage. And if DPS was equal between all of the styles, then you're going to always tend to go towards magic for the damage reduction. At the same time, most of the large, high-level bosses in RuneScape have some sort of melee hit. So people were predispositioned to take magic at these bosses, making it the default style for most players once the gear balanced out. One disclaimer that I do want to mention is that early EOC was pretty buggy for the first couple of weeks. There was items with wrong stats that they shouldn't have had and so on. And we're basically going to ignore all of those items as while they may have been best in slot, they weren't intended to be best in slot by Jagex, and they never really made it into the meta because it was all of 2 weeks before they fixed it. Now that we got that out of the way, let's get into the setup. Things are going to look pretty similar throughout this video as a lot of the content that Jagex has released over the years has affected all of the styles equally, but Mage has its cool quirks that we can talk about. Starting off, we have Virtus Wand in Book, and specifically it needs to be a dual-wield weapon, because at the time of EOC release, up until the Legacy update, Concentrated Blast dealt 205% damage in 3 ticks, while Sonic Wave dealt 120% damage in those same 3 ticks, and seeing as those are the only two abilities that differed between two-hand and dual-wield, our best in slot has to come from dual-wield, so that's why we're not even going to look at the T80 Chaotic Staff. Armor-wise, it's the same except for these styles have changed. We have full Virtus armor, a Saradomin's Hiss, Comp Cape, and one change is a Ring of Vigor. I had made a mistake in the first video, and Jagex had originally implemented a system where if you change your gear, your global cooldown is set to 3 seconds. So it wasn't worth switching to another ring, and instead you camp Vigor all the time. The Ring of Vigor gives 10% adrenaline when using an ultimate, and the initial ultimate ability Metamorphosis was pretty important in DPS rotations, so the extra adrenaline was much better than the stat boost from the Seer's Ring Imbued. Not even a month into EOC and we have our first update, player-owned ports. With it came the Pocket Slot and 2 new Mage-based Scrimshaws. They were the Scrimshaw of Elements and the Scrimshaw of Magic. The Magic Scrimshaw gave a 4% accuracy boost, while the Element Scrimshaw gave a 6.66% damage boost. There was some nuance as to which one was the best, and it did vary based on where you went, but most settled in as the Element Scrimshaw being the better one. The World Wakes quest was such an important quest to the Magic combat style, so much so that there are memes about unlocking the Magic combat style when you complete this quest. It gives you 2 relevant abilities. First off, we have Natural Instinct, which gives you double adrenaline gain for 20 seconds. This is great because you can combo with other ultimates and thresholds to do a ton of damage in a very small amount of time. Sunshine, the other ability unlocked with the quest, is one of the most important abilities for the Magic combat style. It is an ultimate that gives you a 50% damage increase for 30 seconds. This is weaker than the 100% damage boost that melee gets from Berserk, but the fact that it lasts 30 seconds more than makes up for it. April of 2013 gave us what I like to call EOC 2.0. This was the point where Jagex created the 3 armor class system that we have to this day. Power armor is essentially the DPS armor. You trade in less armor stats for being able to do more damage. Tank armor is the armor you would wear to soak up the most damage and give you the most HP. And hybrid armor would be armor you could wear with any style, but you would have a large armor reduction penalty and no damage bonus for using that specific style. The decisions made in April of 2013 are still rearing to this day as power armor has dominated the meta. The defensive penalty for using power armor over tank armor is meaningless as the best way to take less damage is to kill the boss quicker, and barring any overpowered special effect, tank armor sees no use. Moving on to the summer of 2013, and we got blessed with what I think is the best bossing update that Jagex has ever come up with, Virago. Virago was the first tough boss, as I'll call it, something that really pushed players hard, had some really cool defined roles, and really flexed the EOC combat system. It's a testament that 8 years later, it still bodes a challenge to players, even though the team sizes have gotten considerably smaller. The rewards from this boss were well worth the difficulty. It dropped Seismics, the T90 dual-wield magic weapons, and it also dropped Tectonic Energies, which could be made into the new T90 magic power armor. Both became best in slot right away. Seismics are such an iconic part of early EOC. These were expensive, they cost more than some party hats at the time, and when you saw someone with Seismics, you knew they were either good or really rich. Part of what kept them high was that Virago was a boss primarily killed with Mage, so to be able to kill Virago, you needed your own set of Seismics. I bought my first set in late 2014 or early 2015, don't remember the exact day, but it was nearly 2 years after the update came out, and they were still over 1 bill combined for the set. To round out the end of 2013, Rise of the Six came out. This was quote-unquote hard mode Barrows, and for its time, it was a very inventive boss. The rewards were plentiful for melee, giving them both new T90 power armor and a T90 shield, but for magic we only got the T90 shield. This became the best in slot shield at the time right away. I should, however, mention that the bomb tank role of Virago was particularly hard on supplies at the time, so penance tanking was a thing there. You would use an Arcane Spirit Shield, which reduced damage by 30% at the cost of prayer points. Then you would also use the Penance Aura to keep your prayer points up and stopping them from draining from the shield. Apart from these niche uses, the Merciless Kite Shield was widely used as the best shield. Jumping ahead to February 2014, and we have another balance change. This one is centered around the Revolution combat style and the ability to switch your gear without incurring a delay in your abilities. This opened the Switchgate meta that we have today, but it didn't really change for a long time, as on release there was only one switch to talk about, and that's the Ring of Vigor. What was previously best in slot had now been relegated to a switch, and the best ring became an Imbued Seer's Ring. You could combo the Ring of Vigor with the powerful Ultimate Sunshine, saving you 10% adrenaline, which led to more damage very quickly, and then you'd swap back your Seer's Ring on so you have that extra damage for your big boy abilities. Spring and summer of 2014 was big for the magic combat style, and it starts with the Celestial Hand Wraps in April. This was a rare drop from the Celestial Dragons, which you could kill once you've completed the quest Once Upon a Time. The Hand Wraps are T90 power armor gloves, and they've replaced the Virtus gloves for best in slot. The downside to this upgrade is that the hand wraps degrade to dust, so their cost to use were considerably higher than their Virtus glove counterpart, and a lot of people stuck with the Virtus gloves. In May, the ancient combat spells and familiars were added. The Mage spell was Magic Tendrils, which was a powerful threshold ability. Essentially, it was a second asphyxiate, but it also hurt you in the process as you took some damage. The other downside to this ability was the fact that if the target moved, the remaining hits would not register. This led to many complaints of "you walked my tendrils," especially directed at the Voke 5 role of Virago. On top of that, we got the Ice and Smoke Nihil Familiar, both of which give you a 5% accuracy increase. This familiar was used whenever accuracy was a big issue and you were using Mage, and this was pretty common to see at high-level bosses like Virago and Rise of the Six. To continue on the theme, the very next week we got a new best in slot item. In the Dungeoneering update, they provided new rewards, one of which was a Chaotic Remnant. This allowed us to combine the previously best in slot necklace, the Saradomin's Hiss, with the Remnant to create the Arcane Stream necklace, which was the new best in slot necklace for Mage. July of 2014 had arguably the most important update to RuneScape in the post-EOC era, the Legacy update. While its naming convention and the extra combat mode was mostly an attempt to get the players that had quit to come back, the mechanics of what it changed made EOC what it is today. The high level stuff is 138 combat formula, special attacks come back, style bonus replaces critical hit chance buff, and base HP increased to 100 times constitution level instead of the previous 40 times. There were also some background balance changes that were much needed to make the combat feel better, but the biggest one is the style bonus change. While critical hit buff and strength bonus leads to similar DPS increases, it feels so much better to hit higher than to hit the same number more often. If you go back and watch any pre-legacy update EOC content, you'll see similar numbers pop up all the time, and it's just plain boring and it feels like you have little impact on the damage you're doing. One major change for the magic combat style is the rebalance of Sonic Wave and Concentrated Blast. Concentrated Blast was nerfed to deal 150% combined damage if cancelled early, and Sonic Wave was buffed to a 157% ability. Though Sonic Wave kept its special effect that the next ability you do will have a flat 10% hit chance increase, that meant that Sonic Wave was now a better ability than Concentrated Blast, which means two-hand magic was considerably better DPS than dual-wield magic, though at this point there was no T92 hand mage weapon to take advantage of that. But that'll change soon. There is one set that I want to talk about that isn't best in Slot, but it was so widely used that if I ignore it again, I'll get even more comments about it. Void. On the 1st of July 2014, the Void Knight Armor patch was released. This allowed us to go from Elite Void to Superior Elite Void, increasing its armor stats. The main problem with Void in the past was that it put you at 4k HP, making you very easy to kill. But with the Legacy update, we now had a base of 9.9k HP, which meant that Void was much more usable. Elite Void gives you a 3% accuracy buff and a 7% damage buff, which can be normalized to an approximate 10% damage buff. Tectonic also gave a similar approximately 10% damage buff, but alongside it, it had extra armor to mitigate damage, and the damage buff worked on the bleed ability Combust. The short of it was that Void is 95% as good as Tectonic, but it was free so everyone used it, instead of spending all that money on Tectonic. Later on in July, we got Araxor. This boss was tough on release and had all the makings of a great one. One of the items dropped by Araxor is the Noxious Staff, which is a T92 two-handed magic weapon. With the recent buff to two-handed magic, it became considerably better than Seismic's on release. This had a negative impact on the price of Seismic's because the Nox Staff was both more accessible, it was cheaper, and it was better DPS. At this stage of the game, buying your first Nox Staff opened up the entire game to you. I know for me personally, I bought my first staff that fall, and it allowed me to jump into all sorts of high-level PvM. Soul Reaper is one of my favorite updates of the past 7 years. It creates a purpose for killing lower-level bosses, it creates a way for players to make money, it introduces new gear into the game that was game-changing, and most of all, it was fun to do our daily Reaper tasks. With this update, there were 4 new pieces of jewelry added. The Amulet of Souls was the best all-around amulet, as it had a plus 46.3 style bonus, which is plus 2.2 higher than the previous best-in-slot Arcane Stream necklace. On top of that, it also has 2 special effects, which can be normalized down to a 20% damage reduction while using production pairs, and an 18.75% healing increase while using Soul Split. There was a second more niche necklace called the Reaper's Necklace, which provided a plus 3% hit chance boost, but it only had a style bonus of 36.8 and didn't have the other special effects. This meant that most people mained the Amulet of Souls and only used the Reaper Necklace when they really needed the hit chance buff. The other 2 Hydrix items, Death Touch Bracelet and Ring of Death, both immediately became best in slot. The Death Touch Bracelet has the ability to reflect some damage taken back to the monster attacking you, and the Ring of Death has a chance to give you extra adrenaline when killing a creature. On top of that, there were newly implemented death costs where you had to pay GP for your death based on the gear you had equipped. For people with high death costs, they could instead use a Ring of Death and it would lose 15% of the charge and save you from 1 death. It should be noted that Hydrix jewelry was originally degraded to dust, but after a couple weeks they made them repairable with onyxes, which made them more affordable to use and became a staple of the PvMer's tool belt. The Ring of Death's time at the top was pretty short, as the very next update we want to talk about is Broken Home. This was the Halloween event from 2014 and it came with a permanent quest. Once you completed the quest, you could replay the quest and try to complete challenges within it. And if you completed all of them, you would get the Asylum Surgeon's Ring. The ring had plus 21 style bonus, which was 4.2 lower than the Ring of Death, but its special effect more than made up for it. It has a 10% chance to save all the adrenaline cost on a threshold ability, and it has a 40% chance to save 25% of the adrenaline cost of a special attack. The first of our patch notes updates, on November 3rd, 2014, Dominion Tower gloves were made good again. They now exist in the glove spot and act as T80 gloves. On top of that, they also have a special effect where basic abilities can do more damage. These gloves would last for 4 hours of combat and would then degrade. They were widely considered best in slot wherever the monster you were fighting was reflect immune, as that meant the Death Touch Bracelet's special effect did not work there. Arguably the most minor update you will see on this entire video, the second batch of Elf City in the fall of 2014 gave us the Tier 1 task set, and with that a valuable item we can put into the ammo slot, a quiver. It gives you +1 per bonus for each level the task set complete, with Elite being a +4 boost. Fast forward 6 months and not that much has changed for our Major here, but with the Rune Dragon update we have something to talk about. The Hailfire boots, which were made by combining 2 Rune Dragon drops with the Glaycore boots, were now the best in slot magic boots. However, like other T90 armor, they fell victim to the degrade to dust mechanic. These boots cost over 50 mil, lasted 30 hours, and once the 30 hours are up, they turn back into the Glaycore boots and you have to add 2 new attachments again. They only provided plus 1.8 style bonus over the Virtus boots, and they were aptly named Dice Boots as only the people with nothing better to do with their money would use these boots. Summer is for the bosses, and 2015 didn't disappoint. We got Mod Chrisel's last hurrah as Raids, the Liberation of Mazcab was released. This raid was essentially 2 bosses, Beastmaster Durzag and then Yakamaru. There were 2 primary drops from this boss that we want to talk about. First of all, Acto Tank Armor. This was untradeable T90 tank armor. Not only did it do a good job of keeping you alive, but if you had 3 or more of the pieces equipped, then you had a chance of resetting the cooldown of all your defensive abilities. This is the ultimate tank armor and is great for learning bosses or doing no food challenges, but as it's tank armor, it doesn't have a good chance to be best in slot. The second notable drops were 4 new abilities, 3 of which we can use with Mage. First off, we have Corruption Shot, which deals 60 to 300% ability damage over 5 hits, and it can chain to nearby opponents. This ability was such a major increase to magic. Not only was it the best damaging basic, but also had the ability to go to multiple monsters, making it deal even more damage. The only downside to this ability is that because it was a bleed, it could be overridden by other people if you were group bossing, so it kind of became a solo PVM ability. Storm Shards and Shatter. This ability allows you to store up damage from the easy parts of the fight and then release it in one big hit for the difficult parts of the fight. Each time you use Storm Shards, it adds a stack to the boss up to a maximum of 10, and then when Shatter is used, it releases all the stored damage onto the boss at the moment you need it the most. And the final ability we're going to talk about is Onslaught. This ability allows you to deal rapid amounts of damage by draining your adrenaline and then your HP and channeling it towards your target. This ability is much more of a niche ability, and it's only used in specific locations where the adrenaline and HP cost is worth the extra damage. Jagix's attempt to make Slayer a little more interactive with tough but rewarding Slayer creatures in the month of November 2015 led to our beloved Pack Yak getting replaced. There was a new and better beast of burden familiar, the Pack Mammoth. It had 32 slots instead of 30 for the yak, and it was able to eat food directly from its inventory without losing adrenaline. Though expensive, it quickly became a staple at new and long boss fights where its bonuses over the yak would show up. Invention changes everything. Well, not everything, but a lot of things. It allowed us to augment our items, meaning that anything that wasn't augmentable immediately became less worthwhile. This hit the T90 armors hard as they were degrade to dust, and Jagex hadn't prepared a way to have them still degrade to dust, but also be augmentable, so they just couldn't be augmented on release. This meant that Virtus reclaimed its old spot as best in slot mage armor for at least the robe top and robe legs. With Invention came the ability to add perks to our armor, weapons, and shield. On release, the best perks were Precise 5, Equilibrium 3 on our weapon. For our armor, we had Crackling 3 plus Mobile, Impatient 3, Devoted 3, and Biting 3. And then for our shield, we had Turtling 3. While some rare niche combo perks did exist, without a perk calculator, it was very difficult to discern whether a combination was worth going for or not, so the majority stayed with the base perks. The Invention update also opened up new avenues that now new bosses don't necessarily need to drop new items that are best in slot. Instead, they can drop new items that get disassembled into perk that can go into a gizmo. And we got just that with God Wars Dungeon 2 2 months later. God Wars Dungeon 2 had a total of 4 bosses on release, and while none of them were best in slot, they were able to be disassembled into unique components that gave us new gizmos. Twin Furies gave lunging components, which made bleeds deal more damage, but this came at the cost of the walking part of the bleed effect being reduced from 2 times to 1.5 times. This made lunging a dead perk for the mage style, as you were almost always better off just walking the boss 1 square after using combust instead of switching to a lunging switch. Hellweir gave planted feet components, which made damage boosting ultimates last 25% longer at the cost of the bleed from sunshine. It is still a switch to this day, commonly either found on a lower tier wand like a Kyra wand, or a defender like the Calphite Defender. Gregorovich gave us Karoman components, which make AoE abilities like Chain and Ricochet hit additional targets. This perk didn't fall into grace with the mage combat style. It was for very niche uses like Slayer or tagging a lot of enemies at once, though later bosses found a use for it once this perk was out there in the wild. Vindicta gave us Aftershock components, and Aftershock deals damage to your target in an AoE fashion every time you deal 50,000 damage. This was immediately good enough that it replaced Equilibrium 3, but not wanting to lose out on the effect of Equilibrium, it was discovered that if you combine Precise and Equilibrium into the same gizmo, you can get Precise for Equilibrium 2, and that was better than just having a base Precise 5. Virtus's time at the top was much quicker this time. Later on in 2016, in June, Jagex released the ability to augment T9 armors, which means that Tectonic was now the best in slot mage armor again. It still degraded to dust, but you had to re-augment it every time you bought a new set. Later on in June, we got a momentous moment for RS3. We finally broached the T90 tier and moved into T92, and it all started with Telos. Its fun streaking mechanic and rage pushing made for an interesting and constantly changing challenge for the player, and they were rewarded with 3 different T92 weapons. The weapon that we care about the most is the mage weapon, the Staff of Sliske, as it was the best mage weapon in the game, and mage was also the best style in the game at this point, so it was the iconic weapon of the game. If you saw someone walking around with this bad boy, you knew they were rich. It stayed over max cash for a very long time. Personally, I bought mine at 2450 mil, which seems crazy high in comparison to what it is now, but it was well worth it at the time. Its special attack was very weak in comparison with the other T92 weapons with Telos, which left a large opportunity for it to be outclassed by future mage weapons. In the fall of 2016, we were given 2 more new invention perks. Faceted components gave us Enhanced Devoted 3. This takes up both perk slots on the gizmo, but it acts as a approximately 25% damage reduction when using protection prayers. This replaced the Devoted 3 gizmo we had previously, which only provided an approximate 18% damage reduction. Clockwork components, it gave us the Flanking perk. It made stuns very powerful when used behind the boss, as a threshold stun could do up to 290% ability damage with Flanking 3 on your weapon, though you did lose the stunning nature of the ability as a downside. As it was a perk that only affected one ability, it was commonly used as a switch on either a dyed offhand Seismic Singularity or a lower tier offhand mage weapon like a Virtus Book or Kyra Orb. In September of 2016, Jagex released the Rune Pouch. One of the major downsides of the magic combat style was the fact that you needed to carry so many runes around with you if you want to do anything beyond Air Surge. This let you condense the runes into less inventory slots, as you could have 1 large pouch which stored up to 3 runes and 1 small pouch which stored 2 runes. You could also equip the large rune pouch in place of the quiver to save on even more slots. In 2018, they made the large pouch dyeable, which meant that you could have multiple large pouches on you, further saving inventory space for the increasing amount of runes that we needed. To start off 2017, Jagex did their final rebalance of dual wield and two-handed magic. They nerfed Sonic Wave to only provide a 6% hit chance boost instead of the 10% that it previously had, while also giving Concentrated Blast a critical hit buff on each successive beam. This meant that if you had above 93% accuracy, you were better off using dual wield, but for those high defense, low accuracy monsters, you wanted to stick with two-hand to increase your hit chance. The Angel of Death boss release was the beginning of the modern era of EOC for Magic. First of all, it came with a T92 dual wield magic weapon, the first style to get them, and it also came with the Praisal Codex, which gave a better version of Torment. Malevolence was a approximate 4% increase in DPS over Torment, which was just a straight upgrade, and it's such a good upgrade, and it's something you want to get so early, which is why AOD codexes are still like 750 mil to this day, even though it's been about 4 years since this boss has come out. On top of the gear upgrade and the prayer upgrades that came with Angel of Death, it also came with a higher focus on DPS. This was the first big group boss where the mechanics could be mostly skipped if you put out enough DPS. This led people to try to eke out as much DPS as possible with the current meta, and 2 methods were developed. First off, we have continuous 4-tick auto attack, and then we have regular 4-tick auto attack. Now, I don't want to get too bogged down in the specifics of how they work, but it went something along these lines. Continuous 4-tick followed a set rotation of auto. You would then swap to your dual wield activating ability, and then you'd swap back to the staff, and you'd repeat that in a 4-tick cycle. So in a 4-tick cycle, you got a staff auto and a dual wield ability. This led to a massive increase in DPS. Jagex later patched this by classifying it as a bug, as it should be impossible to auto attack twice with a staff in a 7-tick window, as 7 ticks is the auto attack speed of a staff. However, they left 4-tick auto attack in the game. 4-tick auto attack is a little more varied, but it goes something along the lines of start with your staff on, do an auto and ability in the same tick, swap to dual wield, do an ability with dual wield, put your staff back on, wait 4 ticks to do an auto and ability again. That way each cycle you would have a 2-handed ability, a dual wield ability, and an auto within a 7-tick cycle. There's some nuance with channeled abilities and defensives interacting with the auto attack cooldowns, but I don't want to get too bogged down into what C4T and 4-tick auto attack are. And 4-tick auto attack still exists to this day and is a major feature of the Magic combat style. Coming with the Menaphos update was the newly introduced Sigil slot. This is basically a second pocket slot item, but its idea was that it would be an active that you would choose when you want the effect to happen. It had a lot of potential, but the sigils were deemed too expensive to use at a majority of the content, and it was only used at the top bosses by the top PVMers. The best sigil on release was the Limitless sigil, which allows you to use thresholds below 50% adrenaline, meaning that when you ultimate without an adrenaline pot, you can still do a similar rotation as if you had an adrenaline pot active. Eventually, the sigil slot was removed, and the sigils were turned into abilities that didn't consume charges, but were more expensive to make. This was a great decision, as it went from a niche top-level item to something everyone can try to unlock, and as Jagex moved into the 2018, 2019, 2020 era, they went away from degrade to dust mechanics and instead went to high upfront cost and then a small upkeep to keep things going as a way to balance content. The Lost Grove is arguably the best looking place in the game, and it set the stage for a future boss. For now, it is home to 3 Slayer creatures, Moss Golem, Bulbous Crawlers, and Vine Crawlers. They dropped a new hybrid glove that was very powerful, Cinderbane gloves. They had the base offensive stats of Bandos, Armadillo, and Subjugation gloves combined, but also had the special effect that heavily increased the amount of damage that you could deal with poison. They immediately became the best in slot gloves at places where monsters could take poison damage, and their low repair cost made them worth it even on something like mid-level Slayer. It seems weird to get a new best in slot item from Clues, but that's exactly what happened with the release of Master Clues in February of 2018. Master Clues gave us Soul and Reaper ornament kits, which increased the stats of the amulet by +2 on the style bonus. A very small upgrade, but when it's permanent, players will pay for it. I really like this update as it gave life to clues beyond getting super rare dies, which were very expensive but very rare, or fortunate components, which were always the same amount of GP, and there was no variety between, oh, I got a fortunate, oh, I got a fortunate. But this was another item to get that had a good amount of value to it. The Dragonkin Laboratory was released in August of 2018. It was the second elite dungeon to be released, and one of the main rewards was Tectonic Energy. This energy could be combined with Tectonic Energy from Virago to create elite Tectonic armor. This was the T92 magic armor. There was Mask, Robe Top, and Robe Bottom, and all 3 became best in slot. However, on release, they were incredibly expensive to maintain, well beyond being worth it for anywhere, as it degraded way too quickly in comparison with its cost. And very few people used the armor, and it was mostly people going for speed kill records. However, in the springtime of 2020, they changed the degrade to gust mechanic to degrade to broken, and it became way more relevant as an armor set. Up until that point, it was mainly used for elite dungeons, only as it did not degrade inside of them, one of the perks of the armor set. In December of 2018, the minigame Mobilizing Armies was removed. This meant that the ring imbue system had to go somewhere, and that was placed in raids. You could use your techie, which you gain from each raid, as a currency to imbue your rings. This gave us a new best in slot ring as it had a plus 2.5 style bonus increase over the non-imbued version. In March of 2019, there was a major change to how the Spellbook swap spell worked, and it went from a niche thing that people who were doing amazing feats were using to something that the majority used. One of the negatives of Magic was that you needed to use your spellbook for offensive purposes, and you couldn't otherwise have access to multiple ones at once. That meant if you needed Ancients, you couldn't use Vulnerability, and you couldn't use the defensive spell Disruption Shield because it was on the Lunar Spellbook. This change made it possible to keybind swapping to a specific book instead of just a generic spellbook swap that popped up with an interface, and it allowed you to cast it while off of global cooldown. This made it way more accessible for the average player to have access to all the spellbooks at once, with the downside to this was the amount of runes you needed to have with you taking up inventory spaces with your rune pouches. June of 2019 was a tough time for PVMers as they removed the Reaper requirement from the Completionist cape. At the same time, Jacket stripped away all of the perks on the cape, making it purely cosmetic, and the benefits that were originally attached to the cape were now usable with any cape, once you've unlocked the specific requirement. For example, maxing used to give you 3 skill cape perks, so if you're max, you would now have access to 3 skill cape perks, regardless of which cape you had equipped. This meant that any cape could now be the best in slot cape. But the one with the best stats was the Mage Kiln cape. Tokar Kal Mage. This is a pretty old piece of content, so if there's one equipment slot where I want Jagex to focus on for 2021, it's the cape slot. Elder God Wars Dungeon, anyone? With Anachronia's release in the summer of 2019, we were treated to a new best in slot Mage boot. And it was nice because it wasn't the stats that made the boots good, but its special effect. It doubled the charge speed of Detonate, meaning that you could get a full charge in 4 ticks instead of the previous 6 ticks, and you could also get an 80% charge Detonate in 3 ticks if you wanted to adhere to the global cooldown. This made Detonate a part of the DPS rotation even when you didn't need the AoE or you didn't have free charge time. I really like this kind of upgrade because it changes the way we play instead of just giving us more damage and doing the exact same thing. The 120 Herblore update in the fall of 2019 brought about a new potion that is viable for Mage and an indirect nerf to magic from the other potion. First up, we have vulnerability bombs, and while this seems small, it's actually major. Vulnerability was often something that's only used with the magic style, and it gives you 10% extra damage. And this was a big part of making magic just as much DPS as the other styles, but with range and melee having free access to vuln, magic fell even further on the pecking order. The second potion is a simple Herblore upgrade. Stats were now boosted to 120 when using Elder Overloads, over 118 from Supreme Overloads, so it became the go-to overload now, and the extra cost to go to Elders was pretty low, so no one really uses Supremes anymore. Archaeology is a doozy, delayed but eventually out in March of 2020. I could probably make a video alone about all the power creep and items in this skill, but let's go through this rapid fire with 4 points. First off, the Ripper Demon replaces the Steel Titan as the DPS familiar. You deal more damage as your opponent loses HP, meaning that the tough end parts of a fight, you have more damage at your disposal. They were nerfed after about a month of being out for being too strong because they could do parts of the fight for you, but they are still way better than a Steel Titan even though their damage was cut in half. The Inquisitor Staff came out. It was a T80 magic weapon, but it had a special ability. On melee class monsters, it has a plus 12.5% damage boost and a plus 10% hit chance boost. Basically a Hex Hunter, but for magic. It depends on the rest of your setup, but if you have otherwise best in slot gear, it acts as a weapon with T97 damage and T91 accuracy. This immediately killed the Staff of Switchgate, as a lot of the big boss monsters are melee class. For example, Telos, Angel of Death, and Solak are all melee class, to name a few. And if you wanted to kill a monster where the Inquisitor Staff special effect didn't work, you could just use T92 dual wield magic, or just not use the magic combat style and instead use range or melee. The relic system was introduced, and by the time you reach 99 Archaeology, you can get 500 relic power. This allowed the use of different relics, but the two that stood out right away are Berserker's Fury and Fury of the Small. Berserker's Fury make you deal more damage the lower your HP is, much like how the Darrock's Barrows set work, while Fury of the Small gives 1% more adrenaline on every basic ability used, making it quicker to get to ultimates and thresholds. Ancient Invention came out, which changed the landscape of perks. Better combinations were possible, and the highest rank for perks went up +1, so Precise could now go to 6 and Aftershock could now go to 4. Here's a list of all the best in slot perks now. There are 2 new perks from the Archaeology update, and they both made it onto the best in slot list right away. There are more small things within the skill, but those are the main talking points when it comes to the main Archaeology update as it relates to Magic. As the pandemic worsened throughout 2020, there was a lull in updates, and the next meta-changing one was in August with the Essence of Finality release. The Amulet of Souls had been best in slot for almost 5 years now, and it was time for a change. The Essence of Finality combined the powers of the Amulet of Souls and the Reaper Necklace together, granting both effects at the same time. No more deciding between a higher hit chance and better survivability. You got them both now. On top of that, it had plus 9.7 style bonus over the old Amulet of Souls, and as a final thing, it had a special ability where you can use a weapon on it and it stores the special attack in it, which can then be used as an ability. This revitalized old content for other styles, as suddenly outdated special attack weapons could now deal T92 damage, making them viable in DPS rotations. But for Mage, there is really only one item you can put into the Essence of Finality, and it's the Gothic Staff. This weapon has been used as a special attack weapon for years to lower the defense of monsters, but now you could use the same special attack with T92 damage. On top of that, you no longer lost your stored aftershock damage, as you don't need to swap weapons anymore. All in all, a good quality of life for the Magic combat style, but not as game-breaking as the Essence of Finality was for the other two styles. There was also an ornament kit on release where you could combine the Souls ornament kit and the Reaper ornament kit to make an Essence of Finality ornament kit, which gave the same +2 stats to the EOF. Raksha was the final update of 2020, and while it's a fun boss, its impact on Magic was pretty minimal. The major change for me was that Blast Diffusion boots can be upgraded to Enhanced Blast Diffusion boots. This made them T90 boots and gave a little boost to their stats. Otherwise, the effect is unchanged and you can still charge Detonate quicker. But the real benefit for Mages with this update was that Blast Diffusion boots crashed from 100 mil to 10 mil once it was found out just how common the boots were from Raksha. Raksha also drops the Greater Chain ability codex, but it has a little impact on PvM, as there are very few situations where you're able to efficiently take advantage of its effect, and it works better as a Slayer ability rather than a bossing ability. So Chain didn't get as much love as Ricochet is going to get. And with that, we've ran to the end of 2020 and to the end of Mage's progression. We've gone from T80 to T92 and a bunch of other auxiliary items that sculpted the Magic style for us. You can see that Magic stopped getting love after the Angel of Death bossing update, as the meta was way too Mage focused at the time, but we've now gone so far in the other direction where Mage feels like it's a whole different combat system than range and melee. Personally, I haven't used Magic since I switched to using ranged at Raksha on the 3rd day, and have been on Lunars ever since. Thank you for all the support on the first video, the melee combat style progression. I'm very proud of how that video turned out, and it's great to be reaffirmed by you guys, and I've already started to work on the 3rd one, the ranged one, so I'm hoping in that same 2-week cycle I'm able to get another video out. But past that, have a good day, and I'll catch you in the next one.